And they're sending dot, 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 dash, dash, dash stuff back and forth to each other. Those guys listening for beeps and stuff, that's what it is. Well, that's cool. You know, Morse code is nice, wireless telegraphy. But if we really need to be able to talk to people through the air, wireless telephony, wireless telephones. But that's a much harder technological problem to solve. How do you talk to people through the air? It's one thing to send little static bursts. It's another thing entirely to send voice. That's where our next guy comes in. Canadian, Reginald Fessenden, worked for Thomas Edison for a while down in New Jersey. So he learned sort of electronics, if you will, with the first electronic engineer, scientist, if you want to think of him that way. Works for Edison, goes off on his own, invents a heterodyne receiver. It's a new way of receiving these radio waves, but no one's really calling them that yet. They're calling them wireless waves. And I underlined it, a continuous wave transmitter. But that spark thing is just transmitting little bits, little sparks. That's great for Morse code, but you can't talk on that. He invents a thing that you can transmit continuously so that you can put your voice on. Forms a company in 1902. He never gets really rich at this, but he does all right. But if you want the first sort of voice radio transmission, and as far as we can tell, there's been a lot of claims about earlier ones, this is it. And it's just about this time of year. Actually, it was Christmas Eve. He has this little shack set up out on Cape Cod, and all the ships are out there coming into New York and Boston. They're out in the ocean. They're all listening in for little beeps and stuff. And he goes on the air. It's also the first religious radio transmission and the first music radio transmission, because he reads a passage from the Bible, he plays a song on the violin, and he wishes everyone a Merry Christmas. And people are just amazed. All these little guys in their radio shacks on their boats sitting there listening. They're like, all of a sudden they hear music, and they hear people talking, and they hear a violin. It's really cool. So what are we coming up on, the 102nd anniversary?
Yep.
So is he the inventor of radio? Not quite. Notice, it still says wireless telephony at the top. That's still what people are trying to do, is to talk from person to person, from point to point, through the air. I'm carefully avoiding trying to use, I think, unless I already said it's wrong. Haven't said that yet, because that word is not being used yet. They're sending transmissions, but they're trying to talk from me to you, not to everybody. These two guys, if you want the inventors of radio as opposed to wireless telegraphy, well, you can say Marconi. But what we know as radio is these two guys. They hated each other, absolutely hated each other. They only lived a few miles apart north of New York City. They spent most of their lives suing each other over patent infringement. In fact, the longest patent case ever was about radio and involved these two guys. Edwin Armstrong was an engineer out of Columbia. He was about a generation younger than Lee DeForest. You can read Empire of the Air or watch the PBS video if you want the real story on these guys. Neither one was really a saint, but Lee DeForest outright stole a lot of what he got credit for. Armstrong, he wouldn't have been so headstrong and stubborn. He would have been a better guy. But if you want the inventors of what we call radio, it's probably these two guys joined. What do they invent that's such a big deal? That thing. What the heck is that? Huh?
Vacuum tube.
Yeah, it's a vacuum tube. or AKA a diode, add a component to get a triode to it, goes by many different names. Before us, call it the audion. It's as big a deal as the transistor or the integrated circuit. Easily. You need this to have radio. Without it, radio just is not going to work. Edison actually had some of the first ideas with it. There's this guy in Britain named Fleming that plays around with it. So we can't point to one inventor of it. DeForest does invent something like this and patents it, but he doesn't know how it works and can't explain how it works at all. Armstrong actually knows how it works and invents them. Since you know how it works, it's a much better version that he goes on and invents. But yeah, it's the vacuum tube. DeForest started his own company. They used it for long-distance telephone lines. He sold his patents. DeForest had issues. Lots of issues. He outlived Armstrong, though. Armstrong had his own issues. That's the vacuum tube. For you guys, even for me, vacuum tubes don't really mean anything. I can vaguely remember, and maybe if you had that old TV down in your basement or at your grandma's house that took a long time to warm up, you had to turn it on, and it took like minutes to warm up, and when it went out, it kind of faded out and left that spot in the middle. Anybody know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Those are vacuum tubes. Vacuum tubes are like light bulbs. They take a while to warm up and cool down. Sorry. At least I didn't play it. Yeah, this is from the movie because there aren't a whole lot of color pictures of the Titanic out there. Okay, so the Titanic sinks, all seen the movie, April 1912. It sends out the SOS via wireless. The Carpathia and the other ships come. Why is this such a big deal? Well, until 1912, there's absolutely no regulation, no government involvement in any of this radio stuff. Anybody who wanted to could just kind of build a transmitter and transmit. Anybody that wanted to, and anybody could do whatever they wanted. It was crazy. Well, when the Titanic sinks, everyone's trying to get news. They're trying to get reports, who survived, what's going on, and there's just, the airwaves are crowded, and people are transmitting stuff. People are transmitting fake reports, and fake stuff getting picked up by the newspapers in New York and printed when it's not correct. It was just insane. Well, the government finally realizes that and says, you know, we got to do something about this. So after the Titanic, you get your first, in the U.S., regulation, government regulation about radio. The very first step in a long stretch of government regulation on communications. It stretches up to the internet.